2, 1, go live.
Hello. So do we have anybody from the public here in attendance?
No, I do not believe for this meeting we have attendees like we do at the board meeting, but we do sometimes have public comment. Rais, I think normally that comes to you or Marcus. Have we gotten any public comment?
I did not get anything.
No, we didn't get any public comment. No.
I think the first meeting that I attended, there were there was at least one person from the public that joined. And perhaps last time also somebody must have joined. That's why we got the comment.
Well, the meeting is recorded and posted, but we don't have anybody live with us in the meeting.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. Then we have a lot of questions coming from the public about the budget reductions. I'm looking at the budget balancing solutions presentation that's been prepared for Wednesday. Looking at the historical numbers, I want to understand how much of that. So in May 19, we implemented like 12 million in reductions. So compared to that, I think our enrollment ADA has actually been either flat or gone down. So did our expenses go up from that, or are we trying to find even more reductions compared to where we were in 2019?
So just for the public, you are looking at item 15.2.
Yes.
Okay, and you were asking about the 2019 expenses and it sounded like I heard you say 12 million, the reductions of 12 million. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
The question is that if you look at slides 2, 3, and 4, we have implemented 12 million reductions in 2019 May, and then another 2 million perhaps on slide 3.
The total, on slide 3, the total reductions enacted were 16 million approximately.
Okay. So that includes the 12, and then we enacted another 18 million or so in June of 2020. So are these cumulative? Are they so as of today, compared to our 2018 spending, are we close to $35 million below?
We are, so of the 16 million that was the board adopted in reductions in 1920, only, and Rice, you can correct me, but I think it was only about, was it 13 or 12 million was actually realized? You muted, Rice.
Yeah, about 12.5 million were actually realized.
Okay. So 12.5 million of 1920, and then for the 18 million for 2020, Rice, you recall how much of that, based on first interim, how much of that actually?
Which slide you're looking at, Marcus?
The reductions we made at second interim last year.
Last year, okay.
And Rais, while you're looking at that, Trustee Prasad, I think, maybe in a general context, a large part of the conversation as well is, despite those reductions and a declining enrollment, are we still seeing an increase in our expenses year to year?
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah.
Okay, so, and I would defer to Marcus and Rais in terms of that year-to-year increase. There may be places where we see a decrease, but I think overall our expenses are still increasing as it relates to our obligations for PERS and STIRS. And I would have to go back and double check the numbers historically, but generally our general fund contribution to special education programs has continued to increase a bit as well. So I don't know, Marcus and Rais, if you have a...
No, that's exactly right. I mean, with the revenue that we've been getting from the state, our expenses are continuing to grow faster than the revenue that we're getting from the state. and it's for the items that CJ just mentioned: our special education costs,
Mhm.
our pension costs, and our stepping column. I mean, whether we could make no decision to increase our budget based on any board actions, but our budget is still going to go up each year because of those ongoing cost increases.
Okay,
And
so
so I was going to answer this question that, and Marcus sometimes makes fun of me that I refer to this book every time I have to answer a question. This is our first interim budget book. And page 86 of this book has a recap of all those budget cuts and how much is going to be realized. Our projection is to realize $12.76 million
for this year, for the
for
current
this
full
year.
year. Okay.
Page 86.
I don't have the book handy over here right now, but I'll look at it. So, and this is after incorporating all the pers and strs related increases, any of the,
This is purely based on the budget reductions. What CJ mentioned is that those are the ongoing dynamics that we deal with when we're dealing with
yeah,
budgets and expenditures. So these are a list. This is a list of all the reductions that Board of Education and Superintendent and the administration came up with. But due to contractual obligations, we
mhm.
almost never realize 100% of savings.
No, okay. Now
There
the
are
question
always
right,
components that have to be honored.
so I think Superintendent Kamak understood the question correctly. Is so we talk about here are the cuts that FUSD is making. So if we had, let's say, 100 million one year and we make $10 million in cuts, we expect our expenses to be 90 million. But there are other increases that happen. So what was our net? Did we end up net actually reducing our spending, or did the net go up? Or is it somewhere in the middle? So is that a clear number that we can see?
Well, the net is going up because the cuts that we are making is just to balance our budget for that year.
Mhm.
We don't have enough money year to
Yeah,
year.
I understand the reasons. So
Okay.
I'm just looking at what was the net number. Did the expense actually go up or did it go down? Is that number available for 2019?
We'll take a look at that. We can talk about that offline. I'm just trying to
Okay,
make sure I understand what
okay. So
what you're
I
asking
think
for.
it's also good for the public to understand that there are multiple competing factors here, right? And while we are while we are having to make the tough decisions, it's not a one-way street, right? There are multiple variables here, and the net result is something that may be different than what the public perceives. That we just took away 12 million or 16 million plus 18 million away from the system, but other things increasing does not get published. So while I was not in my trustee role, my expectation was that if we look at the final bottom line, our expenses should be reducing year to year.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, CJ.
I was just going to say, I think that's a great point, Trustee Prasad, and I think it's also worth noting, just for our context and for the community as well. When we build our budgets, we build them as we are now on a 3-year budget cycle, and
Mhm.
so we oftentimes look at those reductions as we did in prior years, and then we come into a circumstance where the state changes. Not that they're doing it on purpose, but they change the rules that the rules is probably the wrong term. They change the projection. So if we
Mhm.
were expecting a COLA of 2.5% last year and the funded COLA was 0, that dramatically changes all of the prior projections.
That's
And that was another element that came forward this year very unexpectedly. Is I think most districts, I might not be getting the number right, but I think most districts were projecting a 2.54% COLA, and we actually got a 0% COLA. So that also plays into that consideration. When we make a reduction in a prior year, we're also doing all of those projections based on a future COLA. And when those aren't realized, it kind of creates a double whammy. And in the inverse, if that COLA goes up significantly, like we see in the governor's January proposal this year, it's much higher than we anticipated. It starts to look better. Now we just have to see if that ends up at budget adoption at the state level.
Yeah, and that's a great point, that we only have projections, and the actual number, if we end up getting more money, we may have to not implement some of the planned cuts. And if we get less money, we are trying to go scramble and figure out where to cut more. So that's the normal titration that has to be done. Now, so when the COLA comes in higher, I'm jumping a bit here. There was on one of the slides, you show what other school districts have in terms of their reserves, and we are at the bare minimum 3%. That's a FUSD board requirement. So have we not been able to get any unexpected windfalls to go towards that reserve in the past, or in the near past, I should ask?
Yeah, I will defer to Raisa and Marcus in terms of the near past, but ultimately, we would really have to change our structural budget conditions if we were going to see that reserve level come up to some of the other unified school district averages. Most of the money that we've seen coming from the state, not that we don't appreciate the increased revenue, but as Marcus was describing, when that increased revenue is matched with the increased costs, most of that new money goes away very quickly. So if we're getting an increase in funds from the state level, and a percentage of that goes to the PERS and STIRS obligations, and then a percentage of that goes to the other mandated cost increase, it does make it really difficult to increase our bottom line reserve.
Yeah. So I mean, that's perhaps one of those. As we continue to look at cuts, it's hard to plan for that. If we get any of the governor's upside, then this year we'll have to think about how to reduce less, right? But this should be ongoing vigilance on our part. Because if I look at, you'd mentioned this in our conversations before, but it's a stark difference. Statewide unified school districts are at 17% reserves, and we are at 3%. So that's a huge discrepancy.
Actually, we are below 3%. That's the reason we have to make budget cuts. As Marcus would point out many times, we have a structural deficiency in our budgeting. We are deficit spending. Our revenues are always less than our expenditures. So that difference between revenues and expenditures, that gap that we have, is going to prevent us from maintaining 3% reserve. That is the reason that for the next year, we have to make budget cuts to maintain 3%.
Right. So I'm saying today we are at 3%, and if you don't cut, then we'll fall below the 3%. Is that correct?
In the next year and the year after, yes.
Yeah.
And the other thing, Trustee Prasad, that we haven't talked about that's really impacting our district is our declining enrollment. Because for each dollar that we get in revenue, we lose, we're losing 40 cents or 50 cents because we're losing students. So that on top of our ongoing expenses for our utilities, for special ed costs, for pension, for step and column, it's just exacerbating our situation with the declining enrollment.
Right. Yeah, so that's where we need our more community involvement to try to keep our enrollment up, right?
So that means we have not done a good job for the past many years, right? We have kept it at 3%. Yeah, I'm surprised to look at number. I actually 20%, 15%, and we'll get a 3% reserve. So is this are we exceptional? I mean, in a sense, on the reserve, or are we, or every other school district are behaving the same way?
Ooh, you know what, CJ?
I mean, CG, oh yeah, you have
you know,
been
well,
at other schools, right? And what's your
I'll
Well,
give you.
I
CJ. I'm sorry. Go ahead, CJ.
I think it's a great question. And while this is an average, not every school district around us is going to have a 17% reserve. This is an average across the state. Some will be higher, some will be lower. But I think one of the things we also have to look at is in a theoretical model, all school districts are receiving the same amount of revenue. And that's not the practical reality for how school districts are funded. Some of the school districts are funded via basic aid, and some of them have a much higher LCFF concentration grant amount. And so are we exceptional in the sense that we have a low reserve? I would say that when a school district has a reserve that is near 3% at the minimum level over their 3-year budget cycle, that is something that I don't traditionally see in other districts, but it is very common to see deficit spending in school districts because that is unfortunately kind of the circumstance that's presented with revenue challenges. What I have seen more often is maybe, for example, in tight fiscal times, a school district's first year reserve is around 7 or 8 or maybe 9%, and the second year is closer to 6, and the third year is a little bit lower than that as the structural deficit continues to eat away at reserves. And I think, as Mr. Battle was describing earlier, when you're a district that's experiencing declining enrollment, it makes it very hard to maintain those reserves in any capacity. And I think that's where we are now, based on my observation.
Yeah, and I would agree with everything the
CJ Marcus,
superintendent just said.
I just wanted to add that 88% of our expenditures are tied to our employees, and we have some of the best employees, and they deserve the best compensation. So in the last 4 or 5 years, actually, Marcus was very surprised to see that when we gave salary increases to our employees, uh, that was ongoing increase in our expenditures. Employees do deserve that, no doubt about that, but Board of Education and the administration made their best effort to compensate our employees. But that ongoing increase impacts our bottom line. That's our ending fund balance. Uh, when we gave increase 2 or 3 years ago, the total impact of that increase was about $40 million plus, 40 million over a period of 3 years. So that actually depletes our ending fund balance.
Now, what
That
I hear
increases
is,
3%.
okay, sorry, I interrupted. Complete your thought, then I'll.
Yeah, so I mean, because 88% of our budget is our employees, that's our asset, and they deserve that compensation. But that has been impacting our fund balance.
Right. No, actually, I mean, having the best employees and actually paying for them, these are good things, right? I mean, we are here to serve our students, and the best teachers we can attract would be the best for us for that purpose. Now, I mean, you mentioned $40 million in 3 years. Last year, and then I was hearing that last year the increase was only like a very small 0.5%.
Yeah, last year was 0.56%. But before that, if you look at our budgets, every year we had a substantial increase.
Mm-hmm.
The total cost of that increase was actually impacting our fund balance.
And just to touch on something, Trustee Prasad, that I since Rice has kind of opened that conversation. The year that Rice is talking about is in fiscal year 18-19. The district gave one of the largest increases that year. And as he said, it was about 40 million to 43 million over 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that the district was not aware of at that time, and I was not in the district at that time, but one thing that was not apparent was that the district was in the first year of declining enrollment. They made budgetary decisions at that time with they had received projections from their demographer at the time that showed enrollment continuing to increase from the housing, all the development. But what we found out shortly after I arrived here is that the development we're not getting nowhere near the level of students that we would normally get from the type of housing that's coming in, and that that was the first year of declining enrollment. Now we're in our third year of declining enrollment, so it definitely impacted the district's ability to afford the actions that were taken that year.
Okay. Now, one question somewhat related is, I believe there's an seniority-based increase that happens as people go in the first year, second year, third year. Is there like a table that there's an automatic increase, and then this 0.56% was on top of that, or how? What did the, because 0.5% sounds small, but what was the effective percent increase for most of our employees?
Trustee Prasad, that's a great question. One that from my time as a lead HR administrator, we talked about it in a lot of districts. And if I'm understanding your question correctly, it is that step and column process that we talk about each year. So each year somebody has another year of seniority, they move over on the salary schedule. And I think our numbers are similar to most districts where we generally budget about for that step and column movement each year.
You broke up a bit.
Yeah, most important.
Yeah, we missed the number there. You broke up there. We can't hear you still.
Turn off my video if that helps. Does that help at all?
It's good now, yeah.
A moment away from the call in just a minute until everybody else just turn off their Wi-Fi. What I was saying is that in a lot of districts, that step and column process is usually budgeted at about 1.5%.
Okay.
And what you were describing is that salary increase, in most cases, a negotiated salary settlement is in addition to that year-to-year salary schedule movement. Now, each individual person's increase might vary a bit depending on where they are on the seniority schedule. But generally, the salary increase, the schedule in and of itself is the whole schedule is increased by that 0.5%. And then people move along that way. So it does compound in that regard.
Okay. And obviously our the funding from the state doesn't account for increasing seniority of our staff, right? So because the ADA based the LCFF doesn't change. So or does COLA is COLA expected to compensate for that?
Well, the COLA is well, really, we look for the COLA to help with a lot of our increased costs. So,
including that 1.5% step and column,
including the 1.5% step and column.
Yeah. Okay. And if you got 0% last year, then that makes a big problem.
Exactly.
Okay.
I have a question on top of that. So this 1.5 build up, is this negotiated every year, or it's like what, 10 years contract with the teacher?
Based on the salary schedule. So that's based on everybody moving over one year to year when they move over. So that number in and of itself is usually not negotiated. If there's a raise beyond that, it impacts that number. But the 1.5% is a pretty common amount for budgeting for school districts as they go from one year to the next and employees move over. So even if we didn't agree to a salary increase for any employees, the district would generally see a 1.5 cost % increase as people move along that salary schedule. Some years it can be a little bit less if we happen to have a lot of retirees who are on the higher end of the pay scale. Some years it could be a little bit more if we hire a lot of teachers with or employees with prior experience, and they don't come in at the earlier steps of the salary schedule. But that's in general about 1.5% each year, and then anything we negotiate is in addition to that. And I think, as Trustee Prasad was pointing out, if we got a COLA that was a 1.5% COLA, it oftentimes kind of just is, for lack of a better term, it's absorbed by that step and column process. So even in a year where we're getting, as projected, a 3.84% COLA, some of that has to be attributed to that cost increase that's just going to happen no matter what.
Okay.
Just to put that in dollars perspective, the cost of 1% is about $3.3 million.
Now,
So
is
when
it
we
only,
talk
is it 3.3
1.5%,
million in direct salaries, or is that including the stirs and PERS contribution?
including all benefits, the
Mhm.
cost of 1% is 3.3 million. So if
Okay.
we are saying that 1.5% is a step and column, that's roughly about 4 point some million dollars.
Okay, so then 1.5% step and column is perhaps, is that the W-2 of the employee, and then the stirs and PERS is above on top of that? Or does the stirs and PERS also increase by that 1.5%?
So stirs and PERS is based on the base salary.
Mhm.
For example, if I'm making $100,000,
Mhm.
1.5% of that is the step and column.
Yeah, so let's say
And
last
that's
year I
also the
made
basis of stirs and
100,000.
PERS.
So last year I made 100,000. This year it'll be 101,500. And then last year the stirs and PERS contribution was whatever. Let's say I don't know what the number is, but let's say 5,000. That also will go up by 1.5%, right?
Yes.
Okay, so the net cost to the district is, if stirs and PERS are in the 18-20% range, then you're looking at really more like a 1.8% type increase. So
Yes.
that puts the change more in line with what the industry also does, right? It's in the 1.5 to 2% range on an average. Okay, so I think this is good education. I think if you have any more questions here, then we should maybe switch to what's the tier 1 discussion.
Yeah, that's fine. Mhm.
Okay. So there are many slides here. Is there anything specific that that you think, CJ, from your perspective, that would merit a big discussion in the meeting on Wednesday?
It's going to
I'm saying
merit-
between whatever, slide 7 or 8 to slide 25. 25 seems to be a good summary, right? And we've received a lot of community email related to items that are on this list. Now, so because there are a lot of details there, I want to maybe just go to slide 25. And I have a question. Most of the numbers are standard, right? These are all every year, or is the this is an annual reduction? The number that you have here, decreased designations.
Yeah, most of those are to the right. It says whether it's ongoing or one time. If it's ongoing, that means that it's a reduction which will that has ongoing cost implications. Whereas the one time or just one time, we just save that one amount.
Okay, and then the general fund professional development 25,000, is that total over 3 years?
That's a 1 year that we would do we would do it each year for the budget cycle. So over the course of 3 years.
Okay, so it's roughly 8,000 per year.
5,000 each year. We still have some money in professional development that's categorical, and we'll have to be very strategic about how we maneuver the categorical funding of that, because As I'm sure everybody likely understands, there's our LCAP, which incorporates a lot of what we do. And so there are some categorical professional development funds, but this would be basically freezing the general fund portion of that at 25,000, or freezing 25,000 of the general fund portion each year for the next 3 years. And so when we do it each year for the next 3 years, it allows us to count that over the entire budget cycle.
Sure.
And that's really what we're looking at. And these are things that we have to keep in the forefront of our mind as we move forward, is at that, you know, what we might consider year 4, which is kind of our next budget cycle, but it's complicated. But as we do budgets in the next year out, it will then be year 3. We have to calculate if we're going to hold it at that amount or if we're going to return it to its prior allocation. And that would be a conversation that we would probably have depending on what our revenue sources look like.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question on that. So how much in the current general fund professional development, how much, like an estimate of how much funds are in there? Because well, I guess like if $25,000 are frozen every single year for the next 3 years, is there like enough to compensate for other professional development that's needed?
And I think that's a great question. And we may need to look at how we deliver professional development internally. We have to be very cognizant of those costs, but there's still a couple $100,000 on the categorical side, I believe, Rais, that could help deliver professional development. But I think, Zion, your question without a doubt is really important. We have to remember that it's really an impossible circumstance when we look at these reductions for us to have in our belief that things will look or feel the same. There will be a tangible, real reduction in services provided or benefit provided when we start talking about a lot of these reductions. So while there will be money that remains in professional development allocations, there will be some professional development that can't happen because of this. And that's the circumstance we're in with some of these tough decisions.
Thank you.
Okay.
I also just had a couple clarification questions on some of the proposals. So for one of them, the budget adjustment for books and supplies, what exactly does that entail? Like, are those textbooks or like English books, or, you know, what supplies and things like that?
A lot of things within there. And one of the things that we start by doing is looking at the overall allocation from year to year and seeing just how we can reduce there. And it may be times where we're working with a contract to delay a payment by a certain amount of time, and we can gain a budget savings that way. It's a mixture of different things, Zion. So it wouldn't necessarily mean that we're going to cut X number of history textbooks out. It's a really, books and supplies, as you highlighted, Zion, it's a really broad part of the budget. It's not just books. It's not just classroom supplies either.
Thank you. Another clarification question. What exactly is the board budget? I don't know. I haven't heard that before. And what are those funds essentially?
Used to pay for conferences and travel. And I believe the rough board budget amount is about $120,000 annually. So we'd be taking that budget and dropping it by half. Okay.
Thank you. And then just another thing, for the custodial reductions, how would, I mean, because I believe like originally the board voted to remove some positions and then they were restored, and then this would essentially be removing some more FTEs. So like, I mean, I guess how would Alameda County like react to, because it's a kind of like a back and forth type things when it comes to those, and especially like with COVID, do we really want to like be eliminating custodians?
Eliminating custodians, we don't want to be eliminating almost everything that's on this list. In terms of Alameda County's reaction, I don't think that they'll necessarily have a problem with the fact that, you know, as you pointed out, Zion, we reduced a number of custodians. I want to say it was somewhere around 20 in the prior year, maybe a little bit more than that. And then the board did take action to bring some back. And I think it was just over 9 that came back, or maybe Race or Marcus have this information a little bit more tuned in than I do. But the 4.25 certainly is important, and it all makes a difference. But compared to what was reduced in prior years, this is a much smaller amount. And we do think we can maintain the CASBO ratio, and CASBO is the California School of Business Officials Association, which, even though it's titled for business officials, is a place to look at ratios for a lot of staffing on the operational side of a school district. And so I think we can meet our needs with that small reduction. And I don't want to say that it's small in terms of its importance, but in terms of some of the custodial numbers that had come previously to the board, this is a much smaller number.
Now, would this be just eliminating vacant positions, or would this be existing employees?
Vacant positions as well, but this would be 4.25, a reduction of current positions.
And the vacant positions are all captured in this second row on the sheet?
That's correct. The only exception to that is, for clarity, is in the, there's one vacant TOSA position that's not captured in that. And that's captured in the 2.0 reduction. It would be one of those 2.0 FTE on the TOSA, which is line 4 here.
Now, one number here is not absolute. The Hopkins 0 period, 21,000 per section. How many sections do we have today?
Steve, the general fund contribution to those 0 period programs, is that 4 periods, Rais?
At Hopkins, yes, 4 periods. Hopkins Middle School has 4 0 periods.
And are there other as well? At other schools, do we have 0 periods?
No, I think Hopkins is the only school.
Okay.
The only middle school that has it. Yeah.
You talk about middle school, right? It's 0 period from only middle school. That's but high school, they all have a 0 period. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I've seen.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question on the sequency on the 26, page 26. Oh no, sorry, actually 27. Tier 3, 25 reduction in elementary preparation. What does that mean, preparation?
Receive a preparation period, and it's part of their bargaining contract. And I can speak to it as a former 5th grade teacher as well. The preparation period is when you have a time in your workday where you're not with your students. Your students are somewhere else, and you have time to prepare for your lessons. You may have time to plan intervention. It might be a time where you're making parent contacts, and sometimes you might be participating in a student study team or an IEP team meeting. There's a lot that happens during a teacher's preparation period. And when you talk about it at a secondary school, a teacher might teach 5 periods. They generally do teach 5 periods. If it's not a block schedule, they'll teach 5 periods, and they'll have 1 period where they don't have students. And during that period, they're doing a lot of their preparation, their grading, and the work that I described above. At the elementary school level, our students are getting 45 minutes of preparation per day. And that's a time in the day where their students are going somewhere else. So it might be PE, might be science, it might be music. And this is something I want to be clear, it has to be negotiated because we can't unilaterally just reduce that prep allocation. And so a reduction in that prep allocation could be structured a few different ways. But if it was reduced, it would likely result in less staff, less FTE, because if the teachers have less preparation time, there's less staff that needs to take the students out of that classroom. And so that's where that comes from. And it's really specific to the elementary school because there's not the same master schedule design that happens at a middle school or a high school where students are going from 1 period to the next.
Okay.
have a follow-up to that. So if that prep period is removed, which means the teacher would be with their elementary students the entire day, what would happen to the classes the special classes that are used in those prep periods? So for example, during the prep period, the students would go to a computer lab or a science lab, or there's been like music classes in the past. What would happen to those? Would those just be, not happening?
Unfortunate consequences of this, and it's one of the reasons it's out here in tier 3, because this is this isn't something that, as I said earlier, none of these things are things that we want to see happen, but these are possibilities, and again, this one would have to be negotiated. But yes, Sayan, ultimately those classes, they wouldn't happen as frequently, right? It wouldn't mean that they would never happen, but let's say that a student is leaving their classroom right now every day for 45 minutes to engage in a classroom outside their normal, let's say 5th grade class. It might mean that they only get to do that a few times a week instead of 5 days a week, or less times per week instead of 5 days a week. And that's what results in less staff needing to be there for those opportunities. So like everything else, this is something that has a negative outcome for our students, and it has a negative outcome for our staff as well, because they have less time to prepare the wonderful lessons and things that they're doing for their students.
So we don't have to really negotiate this, right? I mean, we just present those plan to the Alameda County office. We don't have to go into negotiation with the teachers union on the third tier 3.
And ultimately, if we needed to enact the tier 3, then we would have to negotiate it at that point. But what the Alameda County Office of Education is looking for from us is a list that the board has authorized staff to implement reductions equaling $17.5 million. And so if we actually got to that point, then we would need to negotiate those things. But if we don't need to enact those things, then those would not become practical realities.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
And then the last item on the tier 3, this one is some kind of management fee that we are paying, right? So can this not be pulled up, or is this a big ticket item that requires a lot of effort?
And to give you some context for that, CalPERS is the Joint Powers Authority where we provide our benefit offerings from for all of our employees. And we can't change that unilaterally. That needs to be negotiated, because for some of our employee contracts, it specifically calls out that CalPERS will be the benefit provider. But we do pay an administrative fee to CalPERS, and if we are able to move away from it through negotiations, then we would see that savings. And right now, we have not started those formal negotiation proceedings, but we have met with representatives to talk about what it would look like if we utilized a different provider. And it's certainly a very important topic for our employees, because they'll want to be very keen about their level of benefits and making sure that they have those things that they want. And there are cases, and we think this may be one, where we can provide our employees the same level of coverage that they're getting at a lesser price for the employee, which means they actually will bring home more money in their pocket each month. And this is a consequence of that, just by circumstance, that the district doesn't have to then pay that administrative fee for the retiree health benefits. It doesn't mean that we'll get rid of retiree health benefits. It just means we'd be using a different JPA provider.
Right. It's it's like in the private industry, you switch from Charles Schwab to Fidelity or something, and the services continue uninterrupted, but the cost can be managed better for the company. So, so the question is, why can't we move this one up in the tier level so that this can be a more active conversation?
Move it up. It's certainly already an active conversation. I just think that it's something that the county will look to us, and much like the prep reduction, they will scrutinize very closely any savings that we're capturing that's based on a negotiated outcome.
Okay.
Because
Yeah, and CJ, I would add to that that if if we are able to get some traction with this item, and I think as we get further to closer to June, if the board did take an action and the employee groups were supportive of that action, then I think, CJ, I think it would be appropriate that we would be able to switch it at that time, and be able, and I guess what I'm saying is anything that was in tier one, we might be able to strategically take some things out of there and swap them with this if the board did take action and the employee groups were supportive of that. Might be an opportunity.
Sounds good. Now coming back to the tier one, this Bringhurst savings, I saw another email about some immersion program trying to consolidate them at Bringhurst. So are these two, how could these two be, I mean, these two seem to be opposite to each other.
they are opposite to each other, and they are in essence dependent on the board's direction for this. So if the board were to take direction to open up Bringhurst, and if the purpose behind that was to consolidate an immersion program or to open it up to their resident area students only, although I don't think we're quite meeting that threshold alone, then this would have to come off the list. And so those two things, as I think you described, Trustee Prasad, they're in conflict with each other, but they're connected to each other in the context of a budget conversation as well. So right now, our budget holds an allocation to open up Bringhurst for next year. And so if we don't, we can realize a one-time savings of that amount. If we do, then it holds true to where our budget has been projected, and we'd have to take this off of the reduction list.
Now, the consolidating the immersion programs is going to provide some cost saving, but we don't see that as a line item here. So should that be?
It could provide us some cost savings, but I think it'll be a little bit before we know exactly what those cost savings are.
Okay.
And most of the times when we keep the same number of students in a program, we don't see a large cost savings, but if there are opportunities to realize those, sometimes there are opportunities in staffing when we consolidate a program, then we'd be able to articulate what those are.
Okay, so I mean then without, okay, so I think consolidating would create some disruptions for existing programs and existing campuses. So we should look at that carefully to see how much cost saving, what are we weighing off, and well, like you said, this will be something that we should discuss in the full board. I think.
I have a question actually for Kelly. Kelly, there is one of a $200,000 for inspection.
Which item is that?
Let me see. It's for Bringhurst. Okay.
Oh, that is for the inspection services. Correct.
Yeah.
Right, but I
Item 15.8.
Okay, 15.8. I mean, we closed this deal, right? And so why we always get the surprising bills, and I would like to know more about it.
So this is actually not a surprise bill. This is part of the cost that when we were in negotiations with the developer group to have this cost identified. Prior to my arrival, I believe that it was negotiated that the inspection services would be controlled or the responsibility of the district. We were not informed as to what those expenses were prior to, I believe, October or November of last year, of what the additional cost was. There was an original agreement that was established, I believe, in 2017 with ESA Inspection Services. They then proceeded to perform those tasks, and those invoices were paid out of the developer fund that we have set aside for that project. Once the project, I guess, the timeline was extended, or we had some other outstanding issues that caused the project to be delayed and changed, that particular contract still had to be maintained and that work executed. So it's my understanding that there was an agreement made between the developer group, the construction manager, and the director of facilities at that time, that those services would be monitored and sort of tracked by the construction management firm or the developer group. They unfortunately did not provide regular detailed updates of the costs associated with that contract to the district. So as we were closing out and negotiating, the final settlement and the turnover, that is when we discovered that there were all of these outstanding invoices that had not been paid for the inspection services that had been completed. And unfortunately, we had to keep the inspector of record on contractor within an active contract while the project was still actively, being worked on, even though maybe the work had been completed 6 months ago, we were still required to maintain that contract with them. And it's my understanding the terms in the contract had payments of a certain amount over a certain period of time. So when the project was finally completed, they actually were required to also fill out some final documentation, verification, testing, and inspection services that they did as part of closeout. So what you see is that final reconciliation of those outstanding expenses and what the final cost was based on what the negotiations were with the developer group and council.
I think going in the future, I would like to see, our practice is maybe monthly, because we have meeting, twice a month, right? Board meeting. And so we can keep track on what's going on. They certainly don't like to see all these things like after consolidation, now we got a $200,000 bill. You see, what about currently how we practice? Does those management provide us a weekly report on expense?
No, because that's not how we actually track our expenditures. We do a monthly reconciliation of our expenses on the contracts. We do a running tally of a project by project basis of kind of what expenses are being incurred in terms of scope of work and changes, but they're not reconciled or I guess summarized on a monthly basis. And so in this particular instance, the Lila Bringhurst project was a very separate and very special circumstance that was very different than our normal process. So I don't anticipate us having this kind of problem again, because this was, as I said, a contract that started in 2017. And now I believe, and Marcus, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that project was over a year or 18 months behind schedule. And there were a bunch of just challenges in terms of the actual work and delivery of the project that impeded the completion of the job. But as I said, I came on in March of last year, and the project was almost 90% complete by that time. So I've been working to work with council to basically close that project out and get it to where it is now, where we have ownership and possession of it.
Okay. Are we continue doing business with DSA?
Yes.
So have you looked at their contract? Because I think that I read the contract in 2017, they are paid hourly rate of $80.
Correct.
So it's kind of like attorney, right? But I think maybe in their contract, they would say, okay, $80 per hour, but also, we'll charge you based on the length of the project. So can we look in, right? Because you said our project was delayed for a year.
Correct.
So I
Correct.
think we should look at those wording. I mean, so that we can save some money on that. Because see, when the project delayed and they may not doing the job, and we still have to pay them.
Well,
No, that's not. No,
I
that's not what she means though. When the project is delayed, it's still an active project. Work is still
Oh,
happening.
sorry.
It's just not being
Yeah.
delivered
And
when.
that's a clarifying question then, is that did this delay result in more trips by the inspector and more hours of work, or is this
yes, it did.
delay caused?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
it did.
that's
Yes,
exactly.
it did.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a bunch
I
of
mean,
work that was redone, and there was also failures of building systems that they had to repair, and those things are required to be inspected by the DSA inspection company by our Office of Public School Construction. So it's not like the city inspectors where they give you one inspection and you can kind of finish all of your work. Each time there's a change or a upgrade or implementation of a utility or tie-in or building system, they're actually required to be present, observe, and inspect those activities. So yes, there was additional scope of work and they did perform additional services within the extended time period that we're addressing in this
Oh.
particular change order.
no, but thanks, Yajing, for bringing this up, because from the beginning, original to, it's like a double, the contract doubled. And the last
Yes.
amendment is almost 30%, over 30% of the prior amount of the contract.
So and the other thing I think it's important for you guys to understand is that when these inspection and testing services are completed, yes, their contract states it's a per hour rate, but they actually have specific fees that they charge for specific tests and inspections in addition to the hourly rate that they charge for the person that's performing the task. And that's industry standard for those specific services. But I'd be happy to go over that with you and explain it in more detail. But I don't want you guys thinking that there was something in error or not a best practice that was performed in this particular case.
Sure, I think just having a bit more itemized detail would help us understand this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, I think Bringhurst, as I said, was very unusual, and it's not a normal. It is not a normal project nor a normal process that we went through. So I do not anticipate us having to do that again.
Okay.
Everybody, I think it's 6:05, and I know
Oh,
our
okay.
technician has to get ready for another
Oh,
meeting.
okay, all right, okay. Well, thank you guys. It's
Yeah,
we
this
got
was
a lot of
a
things
very
to-
good discussion. A lot
Yeah, and
to
if you
learn.
guys have any more questions, please feel free to email us. We more than happy, especially if it'll help you in your deliberations on Wednesday. Please feel free to reach out to the superintendent, and he'll reach out to us.
Sounds good. This was very useful. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thank you
you.
all.
Bye-bye.
Okay, see you on
Bye.
Wednesday.
Do you have any
Bye.
other questions before we wrapped up? We didn't give you too much chance to speak.
Who?
Zion.
Diane, they said, you have
Oh.
any final questions, or you good?
No, I think I got everything. Thank you.
Okay. Very good. Thanks.
Okay, bye, everybody. See you guys on
thank you.
Wednesday.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.